Hi, y'all. It's Bridget Cutshaw with Real Things Living. Today, my guest is Sandy Rosenthal. She's the author of Words Whispered in Water. She founded a nonprofit, levees.org. She's also a podcaster too, and hers is called Beat the Big Guys. Can you say hi, Sandy?
Hi, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing good, and I'm so glad you took the time to connect and to talk about this. And I'm definitely behind what you're doing. You decided to write this book a couple, maybe over a decade after the not Katrina, I'm sorry, New Orleans was flooded, in that you are brave enough to stand up to the big guys, the government, right?
I didn't really understand how big a job it was going to be. But that's life. Often things are a little bigger than you thought it would be, take a little longer than you thought, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it.
Well, it just shows you that you got to be persistent. You have to, tenacity is part of it, right? And you saw a problem that needed to be brought forward to the public. So looks like you started this nonprofit first before you wrote the book, right?
That's
And
correct. Mhm.
what motivated you to do that? I mean, you were a citizen at the time and still are of New Orleans.
So, what motivated me to write the book?
Yes.
So, in all honesty, one of my closest and most trusted advisors picked up the phone and called me. He's my generation, baby boomer, and we still use the phone and talk on the phone. And he called me from upstate New York and said, Sandy, you must write a book because only you can tell your story. So you just have to write a book. And I said, okay, because I understood what a huge undertaking that was. Having never written a book, I had some idea that's a big job. But I trust him. I value his advice. And so I got to work and started writing. We may want to pause a moment. A trash truck is coming by right now. Can you hear it?
No, I can't hear it.
Okay,
That's okay.
good.
We'll
So we're
cut this
good.
out.
Okay, we'll continue.
Yeah, it's people are so want to write a book, but they don't usually do it until you are being told by someone else that trusts you, right? And then that'll give you the motivation and inspiration to do it. And I think books are so popular, always have been, because it's like a permanent story, and it's a great way to engage with the story. And then you can do it at your own pace as the reader, and you learn so much from other stories like what you experienced. And the title of your book is called Words Whispered in Water. And there was a lot of, my understanding, fraud that you discovered had happened about what they said causes flood.
Yes, absolutely. So, in the days, weeks, and months after the flood, I was watching the information coming in. I was listening to the radio, watching television, reading. Well, newspapers were online because we couldn't have newspapers delivered in New Orleans at that time, and nothing made sense. And I maybe it's something about my makeup. When things don't make sense, I question the information coming toward me. And so I started asking questions, and immediately I got pushback from the organization responsible for building those levees that broke, and that's the federal government, the Army Corps of
Right.
Engineers. They started pushing back at me immediately, and also engineers started pushing back. Well, that's another thing. I guess I'm a little wacky, but when I see criticism coming at me like bullets, I get suspicious. And I think to myself, well, I'm either right or on the right track, because criticism valuable valuable information. I think that's what people don't understand about criticism. Is when people criticize, there's something wrong. They don't like what you're saying, or what you're saying is somehow harmful to them. But criticism is more valuable than friendly advice.
it's definitely, you need to be open to that because we're not always doing the right thing. We don't know it until we get that kind of feedback, right? As you're a citizen of New Orleans, and whoever developed this dam, they were probably cutting corners, right?
That's exactly what they were doing. It was levees.
Yeah,
Um,
Levy, sorry.
yeah, no worries. I mean, it's technical engineering stuff, but
Right.
they were actually looking for ways to save money, and they did a study to look for ways to save money. They made a mistake, and they improperly interpreted the results of those studies, and as a result, they ended up short sheeting all the levees and driving in sheet piling
Wow.
that were too short. They were too short. I mean, it's really a very simple explanation, but the Army Corps didn't want anyone to know about this, and they
Right.
spent millions fooling the American public, fooling Congress, and harassing me and my group. And
Wow.
that's the subject of my book.
How long were the levees installed after this flood happened? I'm just curious. How long?
Only 5 years.
Really?
These were brand new. They
Wow.
tried to say they were poorly maintained by local officials. They were 5 years old. If a brand new building fell
Right.
to the ground, just 5 years old, that's brand new in my mind, you don't blame the janitor. You look to the contractor, the engineer, and the architect. And in the case of levees, it's all three of those.
Right. I think in general, I've noticed not just, I mean, everywhere people are just trying to cut corners all the time. And that's, you've got to look at the long term situation, especially with the levee, just to protect your area and the citizens and humans and animals and everything that
And
are,
levees is a very simple construct.
yeah,
They're basically earthen with steel reinforcements. And the
right.
concept of levee building has been understood for over a century. So these levees should have held. They should have
Yes.
held. They didn't, and ended up being the worst engineering disaster in the history of the country. 300 years of this country, more people in terms of death and damage and destruction. It's the worst engineering disaster
Wow.
in our nation's history.
So when this happened, was your personal property affected at all, or just I'm just curious from the dam?
Well, that's one of the reasons that I was able to be an activist. My house didn't flood. I was lucky. I happened to be situated on something called a natural levee. It's a levee that's built naturally by the Mississippi River, thousands and thousands of years of overflooding its banks. Rivers will actually create levees along the side of them. And it turned up I'm 6 feet above sea level.
Oh,
I
wow.
didn't even know it. I didn't know. So I didn't flood. Our family business didn't flood. My son's school didn't flood. So I was lucky, and I had the luxury, if you want to call it a luxury, of having a little time. Because I didn't have to deal with FEMA and a contractor and rebuild my house or
Right.
attend
That's good.
funerals.
That would have been,
Although a friend of mine did die in the flooding, but his
oh,
body wasn't found for months.
oh, wow.
Mm.
That's scary. And so
Mm.
it sounds like you created this nonprofit, levees.org. So what is the purpose of that? Um,
Okay, very good question. In the beginning, the purpose was to set the record straight, and the record was that the people of New Orleans are not responsible for this flooding. That local officials did not do anything wrong. It was the Army Corps of Engineers, the federal government, that misdesigned the levees in looking for ways to save money. But as I said, they hid that information from the American public for years, and it didn't come out until 2008, 2009. And by then, the American attention has turned away. They're no longer paying attention to why the levees broke. But I didn't give up. And my organization kept working and working. We wrote a book. We're responsible for an article getting published, setting the story straight. That was published in 2015. And a story about it was actually in the New York Times.
oh,
So
wow, great.
every person in the country may not be aware of that New York Times story. Every media organization in the country is aware of it. And they saw that article and they stopped blaming the people of New Orleans for the flooding. And one happy icing on the cake that I must share, about almost exactly a year ago, the Associated Press issued a style guide change. If there are any journalists in the audience, you know what a style guide is. It's basically the Bible of how to write in journalism. And This style guide change says for any reporter for the Associated Press writing about the flooding in New Orleans, you must mention levee failure because that's why the flooding happened.
Right. That's a good point. And we just need to be definitely more people. We need more people like you to stand up and be brave. And I think and it did help, like you mentioned, your house wasn't flooded, so you were able to have more of a different perspective. Like you saw what happened. You were there, but at the same time, we need to speak up. And I think some of the media is getting bad press too, but a lot of it is some of them are in on it too.
The media has a tendency to stick with the original story.
Yeah, they don't want to switch.
They
Yes.
don't, and it's an interesting phenomenon out there. Books have been written about the subject, how the media will stick to an original narrative no matter what.
Yeah.
And that's, like I said, that's another phenomenon altogether. But I think it's critical that I mention when people say, why did you do this? And why did you put up with all that criticism? Again, in my mind, criticism is a buddy. It's a friend. Criticism is where you get your best information. They call it, you can call it lots of things. You can call it playing devil's advocate. You can call it keeping them honest. But I actually thrive on criticism. I would rather get criticism from my worst enemy on my progress than be showered with praise, from my closest friend.
Well, that to me, I see that as you're doing the right thing, right? You're getting the feedback from someone that needs to change, right? And they are not thick-skinned. Your thick-skinned is probably not a good analogy, but you need that. That's the only way you're going to grow and improve is to be able to accept that. And I like that. That shows you that you're doing something right. You're making an impact, right? If you're getting criticism.
Well,
And
thank you. I have never thought of it quite like that, but I agree.
right. I just think it is hard for some people. It just depends on what you're talking about. It's hard to receive feedback too, but you have to be open to it. And you're definitely brave to stand up to this.
I
And
kind of learned
government
this
people,
on my way. I wasn't born cherishing criticism by any means. Okay, I was just as shy and afraid of criticism as the next person. But I think in my journey, the levees failed, my whole world fell apart, and somehow in that journey, I learned that your criticism is where you're going to get your best gems of advice and guidance.
yes,
Criticism.
yes, you need that. And you continue doing it, and you got the nonprofit, the book, and now you have a podcast. So the podcast, I'm assuming, came out after your book was published, correct?
That's
And
correct. About a
it
year
is,
afterward. And keep in mind, it was during COVID. So
yeah, of course.
so my book came out during 6 months after, about 6 months after the pandemic. So no book tour for me. And I couldn't even do a book launch. The only thing what I did do is I called it a sidewalk signing, and I was out on the sidewalk signing books. Keep in mind, it's New Orleans in the summer, so it was about 88 degrees, but I was able to do that. And then one of the big reasons I did the podcast about a year later was, to help get my book out there, to help get more sales. Not that it's not about the money, it's about getting the story out there. But I ended up having a lot of fun with the podcast.
It is fun, and it is definitely, you found a way to get your message out there. You definitely are open to change, and I see it as a positive change. Change is normal in our world, and some people are afraid of it, but you're embracing it, and you're finding a way to make an impact with your community. That's the best thing you could do. And as you're talking about New Orleans, I've been there several times myself, visited with my family and my dogs. And I just just remember that time walking with my great Pyrenees at the time. She was the movie star. everybody wanted, yeah. But I think New Orleans is very friendly. And that's my experience. I saw nothing negative about it. I love the culture. And then I don't know why people, like you said earlier, they're blaming them for the levee break. And I think that's just, yeah, that's the downside of when you're relying on government sometimes. I'm trying to kind of doing a 180 going back to the levee thing. It's just scary. I live in an area that is behind my property is Corps of Engineer property. But that's why I say dam, because they had a lot of lakes created in the 50s in the state of Georgia for water. We don't have we have rivers, but we don't have many lakes for the cities to grow. And you're actually on the ocean, kind of. So that's kind of where you need to protect your city.
We're about 100 miles inland, believe it or not.
Oh,
But,
right. Well, I just think but you're close to and I'm very
to
far
the door.
away. Yeah, but you still got to protect because of the lower level, I guess, of
Yes,
the
we're in a
land.
delta.
Yeah, and it just depends on where you're located. And I know the Corps of Engineers trying to do the right thing, but I think it was the management that was running it were they made a big boo-boo mistake and they didn't want to own it. That's really what it sounds like.
That's exactly what they did here. They made a big boo-boo mistake,
Yep.
a deadly boo-boo mistake.
Yes.
That ended up being, it's still on record as the most costly hurricane. Now, I don't like to call this disaster a hurricane,
Right.
for reasons that are the subject of my book. But if we're going to do that, it is on record still to this day, and may always be, the most costly hurricane, almost 200 billion.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know it was that much money. And that was a long time ago, right? It's still,
Yes, that is adjusted for inflation.
oh wow.
So
That's still a lot.
it's
That's
still,
unbelievable. We
and
need
and
to,
and the important thing is the key thing is the most costly, and it when you factor in the damage, the destruction, we still haven't recovered. You can go to New Orleans today and still see vestiges and examples of homes that still haven't
wow.
been completely rebuilt.
Wow.
18 and a half years.
And that was when something like that happens, is that the responsibility of the homeowner, the insurance, or it's
The answer is it's a combination. New Orleans, as we touched on a moment ago, we have a culture of hospitality, and also we're a bit indulgent, and we're the opposite of the domineering homeowners association. The city of New Orleans gave its residents time to
yeah,
come home, time to rebuild. Keep in mind that if you flooded, so did your mother, your sister, all your children, all your relatives. They all flooded too. And in that environment, the city of New Orleans was indulgent and did not come down and take people's houses away if they didn't fix them up in 6 months.
that's good. That shows you that they're doing the right thing for the community. And it's just sad that you guys got blamed. Not you, but the city of New Orleans
Oh,
got blamed, and the
oh
citizens for what
yeah,
happened.
could have been me. I mean, I would be on an elevator and people
Right.
and just talking about, yeah, I'm from New Orleans. Oh, how are they doing? This is well. We're doing better, but those levees should have held. It was the Army Corps' fault. Oh no, 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 no. Those levees were fine. Katrina was a huge storm, and for years that was the response I got. And they didn't may not have blamed me personally, but they might have.
Right. But that's kind of remember hearing all that it was just based on I remember seeing that in the news. But I don't live close to there, but it was definitely they were blaming it on the hurricane and not the levees, how the infrastructure was. It would have been better, much better, less damage if the levees were. I mean, I don't know, you don't know if there would have been any damage or not, but it definitely would have saved so many more lives, right?
Had the levees not broken,
Yeah.
there would have been some wet ankles and some
Yeah.
soggy carpets and
Right.
some hot shingles.
Right.
And you know what we call that in New Orleans?
But
Inconvenient. We would have had what we call inconvenient flooding.
right.
And that's why so many people stayed, they thought it was going to be another case of inconvenience.
Right. It's so I'm just trying to think the government wise. So when they put these levies in, they were just replaced. I'm just trying to understand why the government, federal government offered to do this, right? I'm just trying
Oh,
to,
sure. Just a
yeah.
little wee tad of history.
Yeah.
And 1965, Hurricane Betsy broke some levees in the lower Ninth Ward
Uh-huh.
and almost broke some levees in a white neighborhood west of the city. Almost, not quite. And after that, the federal government, in its wisdom, decided that from now on, the federal government will build the levees in New Orleans and the locals
Okay.
will maintain them. That was in 1965. 40 years later, when Hurricane Katrina's surge arrived, the levees were still incomplete. Although that isn't why they broke. It's not that they
Right.
were incomplete. They broke because they were misdesigned. That's the WeChat of history. The locals don't build their levees anymore. All they do is maintain them. And in the weeks, months, and years after the flooding, we were blamed for not maintaining the levees, which is absurd.
Right. It's right. You didn't know it wasn't built properly at I'm sure they did not know
Oh,
that.
we didn't know.
Yeah.
Information didn't come out for years.
They were
Years.
just, again, it goes back to cutting corners
Mhm.
and just looking at the short path rather than a long-term situation. And I think we need more people like you, Sandy, to stand up and have the bravery. And you're a good example. And I think that's why it's important to get your story out there, just so give some people some inspiration or motivation. If they see something wrong in their community, it doesn't have to be the same type of situation, but to stand up and do the right thing for everybody. And I also think, I think big money. Sorry, I should say this. Who knows? I should say big money, but I've always had an not a trust for big corporations. That's just me. Because of what I've seen in the corporate world. I was in the corporate world, and I think companies should do the right thing for the people and look at it long term and not just look at profit or
I am afraid that your wariness and distrust is well placed because corporations do have the wherewithal and the money to do the right thing. And some of them do.
yes, some of them do. I'm not saying that right. Some of them do.
Right.
Yes.
But I wouldn't, not many, I'm afraid.
Right.
Not
It just anyway, our culture, we just got to have more people stand up, more citizens to stand up. And I think the media does need to talk about this more. And I don't know, the New York Times, if you can share that link, that would be really helpful. So where can people learn more about you, Sandy?
the best thing to do is well, two things. One is my organization is levees.org, levees.org. And I would think that's the best because if you want to know
Okay,
more about me, you'll find it there. If you want to know more about my book, you'll find it there. If you want to know what we're doing lately, you'll find it
that's a
there.
good point. Yeah, I think that's great that you have this nonprofit to help put it all in one place, and then they can understand what you guys are up to and what you're doing to help others. And for those that are listening, I'll put the link in there, and I'm going to find that article that you mentioned, the New York Times. And I think it's so great. I knew about this, but I didn't know all the details. And this is really, really helpful how we need to help each other out.
I think that's a wonderful idea. We definitely all need to help each other out.
Yes. You just can't do it alone.
No, no. And anyone that thinks they can is not going to succeed.
No. I mean, when I was younger, I was guilty of that. But as we age, or excuse me, as we grow older, we get we have that wisdom, and you have a lot of wisdom that we need to share with everybody. And I thank you so much, Sandy, for your perspective, and it's really beautiful. And I love how you're trying to beat the big guys, right?
Yes, thank you so much. And my final parting advice is, cherish that criticism. Cherish it. It really is your best buddy.
Yes, it is. You learn so much. Thank you, guys.